We are monitoring very closely a developing story coming out of the Caribbean, the formation of Hurricane Elsa. It's now just entering the Caribbean Sea, and I don't think it's going to affect Florida or any of the continental United States for the holiday weekend. But going into next week, this might be a story that we have to watch very closely. The track of this storm is mimicking the track of Hurricane Matthew. In 2016, Hurricane Matthew did a devastating amount of damage to the entire east coast of Florida. While it didn't make landfall, it tracked directly up the coast parallel with the state and brought an enormous amount of storm surge. But it calls into question this story coming out of Surfside about water and its effect on high-rise buildings. This is the forecast track for what they're calling Hurricane Elsa. It's supposed to come through the Caribbean, go between Haiti and Jamaica, landfall over Cuba, and then after that, it's kind of a guess. But as you can see, it's right here, coming in through the islands, and they're just making this kind of gentle arc as the prediction. But that was also the prediction for Hurricane Matthew. But this is what Hurricane Matthew did. Did the same thing, got to about here, and then it shifted south, and then went straight north, and went off the eastern side of Cuba, and then they thought it was going to hit Miami. They thought it was going to be another Hurricane Andrew-like event. But then it just stayed offshore, but it kept getting closer and closer. And where I'm speaking to you from right now is a little place called Palm Coast, Florida. It's kind of between St. Augustine and Daytona. St. Augustine, even though there was no landfall, took a major storm surge hit. And there are buildings there that are hundreds of years old. And they didn't collapse. There was an entire neighborhood called Davis Shores where virtually every single building was destroyed, was standing underwater, under 6 feet of water, with hurricane force winds. And this hit the entire coast from Miami, the storm surge did, all the way north to Jacksonville, and there wasn't a single report of a building collapsing or even being not suitable for habitation because of damage, because of water in the basement. There were these huge high-rises literally sitting in standing water, being battered with hurricane force winds. As soon as the water receded, they cleaned up. Buildings were fine, perfectly habitable. People have been visiting them for the last half decade, no problem. And that's Matthew. That was also the case after Andrew back in 92. But if you want a resource for all things hurricane, I have not found on the net a better clearinghouse for all of these images than trackthetropics.com, just like it sounds, trackthetropics.com. It's a privately run site that works only on donations, no ads, and it is the best site on the net. It covers radar loops from all over the globe, really, and it has specific pages for the Caribbean and even specific pages for specific hurricanes. All information that is available on it as far as imagery goes, you can find here. So that would be my suggestion, trackthetropics.com. Now, this is an image that shows the landfall of all major hurricanes in the United States, 1950 to 2017. So it's going to leave out a few for the last few years. But when you look at Florida, just since 1981, when that building was built, we have Floyd, Irma, Georges, Andrew, the huge one, Andrew. A lot of people don't remember Katrina hit Florida before it hit Louisiana, 2005. Francis, Jean, and then technically they're not counting Matthew, But Matthew brought an enormous amount of water into eastern Florida. And that's what they're blaming this collapse on, water, really. And here's another question nobody has brought up. This is a star fort, pardon me, in St. Augustine. It is an attraction that brings people from all over the globe to visit it. It's the Castillo de San Marcos. It was built in the mid 1600s. It was built in the mid 1600s. Now, imagine how many storms have hit since the mid 1600s. Almost 400 years. Has it collapsed? Is it unsafe for habitation? Do they need to worry about bringing it down? You know, it's bizarre. It truly is absolutely bizarre. And for those of you who have forgotten about what happened back in 16, what happened to St. Augustine was biblical. The amount of damage, in especially a place called Davis Shores. It's a little neighborhood. There's not a lot of big buildings there, but virtually every one was almost underwater. Hundreds and thousands, actually, of buildings. This is the downtown area. Some of these buildings are hundreds of years old. And they withstood hurricane force winds and were literally sitting in standing water. This is an image from St. Augustine Beach in the aftermath. It's not a huge high rise, but it's a hotel. This is I believe still is the Teeny Martini bar right on the waterfront. This is like a hop, skip, and a jump from the Star Fort. The water level was up to these columns when it came in. The entire city was evacuated. This is the track of Hurricane Matthew from 2016. Started right here, is doing the exact same thing, and then it turned north, and it brought this huge wall of seawater into the east coast of Florida from Miami all the way to Jacksonville. It continued north. It did the same thing to Georgia. There are some ancient buildings up in Savannah, too. And no stories of collapse. No stories of, we got to evacuate everybody and bring this other side down because that's what they're talking about now. Just too unsafe. And don't get me started on Andrew. Hurricane Andrew had 175 mile an hour winds. It was a Category 5 hurricane. When it hit the East Coast, and by the way, this building was built at that time. This building was built in 1981. This is 92. So this is 11 years later. Made landfall just south. I mean, literally just south, a hair south of where this building was standing. And it brought, an epic amount of damage to Florida. Andrew was one of the most damaging hurricanes, second only to Katrina, I believe, in total damage to buildings. And I believe number 6 in total power. There have been a lot of very powerful hurricanes that didn't do a lot of damage because they didn't make landfall in areas where there was a lot to be destroyed. But Andrew hit one of the most populated areas in the entire United States. I believe there were some places where 90% of the buildings were destroyed just from the wind. And this building, Champlain Tower South, perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I'm sure it had some damage, probably some damage to the exterior, to the facade. And I'm sure it had water in the basement. I'm positive it did with a storm this size. Andrew was a monster. This shows how big it was. If you took the eye of this and you put it, it would have covered the entire state of Florida. And this was back in 92. I'm sure a lot remember this. How? How does just a leaky pipe and water in the basement translate to the entire collapse of the side of a building in its own footprint? Not a partial collapse. Didn't tip over sideways. It didn't crack and lean. Everybody's seen the video loop. Everybody's seen the flashes. And when you add up all of the surrounding events, 3 days later, we're launching on Iran. A visit from the president to what would be just really a local issue. Building codes and building standards and building maintenance and inspections. That's a city county thing. That really wouldn't even fall in the governor's purview of things to be worried about. Not that he shouldn't be worried about this. Of course, we pray and we have events like this and we bring all resources to bear to support the families and get the problem fixed. But what they're talking about, assessing causes, is something that would have fallen to local authorities that a sitting president would have visited within 7 days. That's, to me, the final piece of the puzzle. That this was something that perhaps was different than what they're telling you. But, of course, I cannot talk about it in detail here. But if you would like to get read in on the real reasons for Surfside, Patreon, set at the lowest possible level, behind a $1 paywall, $1 per month paywall, less if you sign up for an entire year. It's like 80 cents. Trust me, this is not what they're saying. And we really, really, really need to keep an eye on Hurricane Elsa because it's following the track of Matthew. And if it follows the track of Matthew and does some analog type thing, and it brings a huge storm surge to Florida, whether it's our side of the state or even the Gulf side of the state, there's plenty of high rises over there too. People are going to start to ask questions and say, hey, wait a minute. This was hurricane force winds bringing massive amounts of seawater into the basements of all these buildings. You're telling me they're all at risk now? And if they were all at risk this entire time, why hasn't anybody warned anyone? You see, they're going to have a real hard time answering those questions and trying to bend themselves into pretzels to explain this. So I will leave it there, but pray for those in the path of these hurricanes. And as we go into hurricane season, we could sure use it. God bless, like, share, subscribe, and we will see you tonight on Twitch.